How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How about you?
Good. Thank you for willing to do this.
Of course. I'm glad we were able to make something work before this is like the one week this month I don't have a con,
Oh, yeah. So I can try and maybe focus on some things that you hadn't talked about as much or ever.
Sure, yeah.
The first thing I wanted to ask was when you did get to LA, what was the job that got you into SAG?
Um Trying to remember. I think it was like a Russian live action dub or it was something that was like small, it wasn't like a big anime project or a big game project. It was like a random foreign dubbing project.
One of your first video games that I hadn't listened to you talk about was Eternal Poison.
Oh yeah, that was a long time ago. I don't really remember much about that game, to be honest, just because it was so long ago. But it was cool to do something on PS2 right
Mhm.
before that era ended.
What about with in terms of anime, like your first more darker, dramatic part? Do you remember what that would have been?
I mean, I worked on Blue Exorcist, which was, I think, the first like big anime I worked on. I'd worked on some shows before that, but Blue Exorcist was kind of like I guess, more like shonen-esque kind of.
Mhm.
I don't know how to describe it, but that sort of thing.
And if you could pick a single one, what is like the darkest headspace you think you've had to gone for a role so far?
Oh, let me think. I mean, there have been a few. Like, oddly enough, there was this one JRPG I did called Death End Request. And, if you look at the character designs, it's very cute and bright and bubbly looking or what have you. But there's a lot of like really messed up backstory that I think all the characters have. But I know my character had some pretty dark stuff in her backstory. And I was like, really, because most of the times we're not really seeing the script or anything before we record any
Mhm.
voice project. So sometimes, we're finding out in the booth. And then when the director told me, like, oh, yeah, so this is kind of what happened to her in the past. And this is why she is this way. And, why she kind of like gets this sort of like flashback in this scene. And I was like, oh, wow, okay.
Mhm. Well, I think with anime, I know one of your darkest that's also in like a lot of characters you play was a Hayase.
Yeah, that's another really good one because I feel like she was probably the most just evil character that I've ever played. And one of the challenges with playing a character who is, I guess, just very like evil without like a lot of redeeming qualities in a sense is that you kind of have to find because I was told in a class once, it's like when you play a villain, the villain maybe they think they're a villain, but most of the time they're not like, I'm a bad person for the sake of being bad. Like a lot of times they have some reason why they do what they do. So, like, you kind of have to approach it as, okay, well, even though these things she's doing are really messed up, in her mind, she's justified. And so, as an actor, part of your job is to find kind of like, that justification in a sense. Like the character's, in her mind, she's saying, well, I believe I'm doing the right thing, or, I believe this is for people's good or what have you. So that's kind of like the challenge because if you approach it as like, well, this character is just horrible, then you're not going to portray them in a way that is like authentic and believable.
Mhm. And this is probably obvious too, but do you always find something that you can relate to, even if it's a really twisted character?
Um, I mean, I think a lot of the common threads that come about are just human emotions in general. So a lot of times we're going to be playing characters that are put in situations that we would never be put in or reacting to these situations in a way that we wouldn't personally react to, but you can kind of draw on that sense of human emotion, like whether it's like, oh, this character is lonely and they want some kind of companionship. It's like, well, every human has experienced loneliness, every human has experienced some type of loss, so even if you're playing a character who say they've lost their parents and that isn't something that you've dealt with, fortunately, then it's kind of like, okay, but everyone's experienced loss in some way, whether it's like a friend or a relative or even like an animal or something. So it's kind of like, as a human, you can access these different emotions, even if you've never had that sort of situation.
Mhm. And of course, it's not or like a super dark series or anything, but Setsuna is also obviously kind of unlike a lot of characters you play too.
Yeah, and kind of the interesting thing that I was thinking about Setsuna recently is, in terms of like how if somebody just relies on life experiences, it can kind of be difficult to carry that over into acting because, for example, I'm an only child. So I literally like don't know what it's like to have a sibling. But Setsuna, obviously, so much of her story hinges on her relationship with her twin sister Toa. And so, even as somebody who doesn't have siblings, I have to, understand enough about these relationships and understand kind of, well, this is sort of her complicated relationship with Toa and just seeing how it plays out as they sort of grow closer together. Because, at first it's like Setsun is very like distant. She kind of just relies on herself and she's like, no, it's fine. Like, I don't need anybody. And, and then over time, it's kind of like, oh, so this is what it's like to have a sister. And I think that's really cool that she's kind of like discovering that.
Mhm. Yeah, and I did think that all the scenes so far where she goes into her demon mode, I thought that you did a really fantastic job with that.
Thank you. Yeah, that was challenging. Like it was very fun, but it was also extremely vocally stressful. And just like with JoJo, when the original actress does such a great job, it's a really high bar to live up to. So in the case of, obviously I couldn't do this for JoJo because it's not out. All we had was the trailer, but Japanese and English released at the same time. But with Yashahime, the Japanese version was already out on Crunchyroll. So thankfully, I could go to that episode where she does the full demon transformation. And I watched it once through, and then I watched that scene specifically again because I was like, okay, this is going to be a lot. I need to be able to like vocally prepare for this. And, it was really challenging, but I tried to just not book anything else on that particular day because it's kind of like you're just going to be destroyed after you do that.
Hmm. Kind of related to that, too, what do you think is the case where you've had to alter your voice the most significantly so far?
I mean, sometimes when I play boys, for example, I was thinking about how I hadn't played boys in a while and I kind of miss doing that. I play a lot of boys that are just like, they have a couple lines in the background of a show or something, but I think some of the last named important characters I played was like Zushi from Hunter x Hunter.
Right.
And I feel like if you're because I used to play a lot of kids. I don't get cast for kids as much anymore, sadly. But like I used to play a lot of kids in anime. But if you're playing a boy, I feel like you have to kind of alter the way you speak. And like there's even certain things it's hard to explain it in words, but like even like the way you enunciate things is different than if you're playing like a little girl. And so there's certain, because a lot of people just assume like, oh, if I'm playing a boy, I got to add texture to my voice. And it's like, yeah, sometimes they have texture, especially if you're, doing like a shonen anime type of thing, but not always. Like if you listen to little kids just talking, they don't all have like scratchy voices or, sound like Naruto or what have you. So, or like Ash Ketchum, that's the other one that everyone references when they try to learn to do boy voices. But it's like, so you can give the character that if you need to, but you can't just rely on adding texture to try to make it sound boyish. You kind of have to like, it's the way you even like say the words, if that makes sense. And the attitude is like the biggest thing.
Mhm. Yeah, I have found having talked to people like Colleen O'Shaughnessy and Corey Walgren that everybody has kind of unique processes for doing boy voices. Is there something that you do, or does it just kind of depend on the character?
I mean, I guess it kind of depends on the character, but I think it's sort of like a vocal placement that you just go to. When you're first learning to do it, it takes kind of a lot of I guess learning that muscle memory, just like when you do anything, if you're doing like a squeaky high pitched voice, it's the same thing. You kind of have to like learn that vocal placement and then it's muscle memory. So, if someone asked me to do like Hyoko from Danganronpa, like I can just go right into it without thinking or what have you. So, it's the same thing for like when I was a teenager and first trying to learn to do boy voices, and it was really hard. I have to like try to work on it, try to like, I would listen to other actors. Like honestly, as much as kind of like imitating and doing impressions and stuff gets a bad rep, it's like it's good as a tool for learning. Like, of course, you're not going to get cast for things if you're just like, hey, I can sound like this existing actor, but you can listen to those actors that you look up to and say, hey, like this actress does a really good young boy voice. So I'm going to listen to her performances and listen to what she does and sort of like emulate that. And then from there, I can learn the placement and I can kind of learn how to make it my own.
Mhm. And I'm not sure how many cases it's happened with anime so far, but has there been a series where you play like a multitude of characters that you were like acting against yourself, or
Yeah, sometimes. There was this game. I don't think a lot of people have really played it, but there was a game called Kurtzspell. It was like on, I think, mobile and PC. I can't remember for sure, but I had played the characters in a previous mobile game called Grand Chase, I believe. And then it turns out these characters crossed over into this other game and they had to interact with each other. And kind of the challenge with that is because, okay, if you're like, a lot of times actors are multicast, especially in mobile games, but most of the time your characters won't interact with each other and they'll do that purposely in casting. Or if they really have to have your characters interact with each other, they'll make sure they're completely apart from each other. But in this case, it was kind of a matter of like, oh, they had no idea that later there would be this like other game that came out featuring these characters and they would have to interact. So in that case, and their voices were kind of close to each other, like in terms of they had different attitudes and things like that. You know, one of them, she's very kind of like outgoing and maybe a little bossy, and the other is kind of like this, you know, like more calm, like elf girl. But you know, the pitch of their voice and kind of the sound of their voice were sort of similar. So it was kind of that challenge of like, well, we already established these characters' voices. We can't go too far from that, but we can try to like really do anything we can to distinguish them.
Mhm. And then with Fire Emblem, did you got Erica first before Katarina?
I was actually cast for both of them at the same time. So the initial recordings I did in the same session. I
Okay.
think Erica came out first, you know, because sometimes it's sort of like they just release the characters on whatever schedule. Same for like sometimes you'll do a couple skins and you don't know like which one is going to come out first or what have you. But, you know, in a case like that, it's not as big of a deal to make sure they're super, super distinct because they're not going to interact with each other. But, you know, at the same time, I think the best way to do it is you want to just really commit to kind of like that character and what makes them unique, you know. So a character like Erica, for example, it's like, you know, she's like a swordswoman. I mean, she has like, you know, alternate skins, or she's can use like magic and this and that. But you know, kind of like this whole like, well, I'd prefer not to fight. I prefer that things could be peaceful, but if this is what we have to do, I'm going to do it and stuff like that. And you know, kind of like that resolve, I guess. Whereas someone like Katarina, I feel like she would be a little bit more unsure of herself and, you know, kind of like, okay, like I don't want to hurt you, but I guess we have to do this sort of thing.
And between both of them, who do you think you relate more to then?
Probably Erica. I mean, I love them both very much, but I just like I really love a lot about Erica. Like, I love just all the different kind of like skins I've gotten to work on. I love how I've got to explore like more of her relationship with her brother Ephraim and you know, all this kind of stuff. And I don't know, I feel like I've had, because I've done so many skins for her, I've had a lot of time to kind of explore her character. And one thing that I would love is if they ever did like a Sacred Stones remake for modern consoles that had voices. I think it'd be so cool to just get to explore her even more.
Yeah, it's probably, is it hard to pick a single character with everybody you've played who you relate to the most?
Um, I mean, there's certain characters that feel like they just fit really well. One of them obviously being Jolene, and I'm sure that part of that is just because I've loved JoJo for like the past 8 years. Like I've literally wanted to play this character for 8 years. So, you know, obviously having read the manga and stuff, I feel like I can relate to Jolene a lot. I mean, she's obviously way cooler, way more badass and stronger and stuff like that, but they're still like Jolene is like the idealized version of who I'd want to be.
Mhm. And this was going back to boy voices. I did think it was cool, and that you got to be Jibanyan and Yokai Watch.
Yeah, that was really fun too. And, you know, part of what was sort of challenging with that was because there was already an English voice prior.
Right.
And, you know, sometimes like things change, studios change license or what have you. You know, there's a whole bunch of reasons why, for whatever reason, sometimes there'll need to be a whole new cast for something. And the challenge when you're coming into that as a new actor is that you know that people are always going to compare you to the original voice, and people are going to say like, you can try to match as closely as you can, but even then it's kind of like, I was able to kind of study what she did in some of the previous stuff, but when I'm hearing reference, obviously for the new season, I'm hearing the Japanese reference. So my instinct kind of is I want to match, what they're doing in the Japanese reference. So then there's kind of the added challenge of like having to remember, okay, here's what the English reference sounded like, and I don't want to stray too far from that.
Mhm. Everybody else I've talked to who was part of the Sailor Moon redubs said that they got to audition for a multitude of characters. Is that your experience as well?
I actually don't believe I auditioned for Mehmet. I was just brought in. I guess the client had said like, "Hey, we've heard you play similar characters in the past. We like what you did, so do you want to be in Sailor Moon?" And like, of course. So I wish that she had gotten to stick around longer. She was really, really fun, and I feel like she was such a fun character to play. But thankfully then I got to reprise her again briefly, so that was cool.
Mhm. And has there been many cases or any cases with anime so far where you've gotten to sing?
Um, Not very often. A lot of times, because for example, I've been in several idol anime and stuff like that, and
Right.
usually they always keep the songs in the original Japanese. It would be cool too. My understanding is just there's a lot of like licensing and rights issues that come with dubbing songs. I know it used to be way more of a thing in anime. I kind of miss it. I'm not a great singer, sadly, but I like doing it. I wish I got to sing more in projects. I feel like there may have been, like, I've gotten to sing for like kids' cartoons
Mhm.
before. I sang for Veggie Tales when I worked on that. I sang a little bit for, let's see, I didn't get to sing for Lego Friends because they had special, like, separate singers that they recorded elsewhere. I do like these cartoons that are only aired in China for like kids learning English. And a lot of times I do songs for those. Most of the time they're pretty simple, but I actually do play like a little boy in that. I mean, he's like a tiger, but still like a young boy voice. And we get to do songs about like we go to the store and here's what we buy and stuff like that. So it's really cute.
And do you think that you have a this is another probably obvious question, but in comparison, do you think you have a preference for working on anime opposed to original? I know it's a lot different.
I like things about both. I think the obvious draw that a lot of actors have to original animation is that you're not restricted by timing and you're
Mhm.
not restricted by what the original voice in another language is because you're setting the original voice. So I think there is a lot more freedom to that. It's nice to not have to worry about everything you do just fitting the mouth. But I really enjoy working on anime because I just like the medium, so as frustrating as it is sometimes you know, to have those timing restrictions and, in terms of like the fan base, people are always going to say like, oh, you're never going to be as good as the Japanese actor and stuff like that. And, there's something nice about if you get to do something where you're the original voice because then nobody's going to compare you like that. But I don't know. I really enjoy working on anime. I like, kind of like I don't know, I guess I like anime was one of the things that inspired me to be a voice actor. So I will always like look at it fondly. And it is kind of nice in a way to be able to see what's going on the screen because I feel like I'm pretty visual when I'm acting out a character. So if I can't see what's going on, and obviously that happens like sometimes for games, we don't see what anything's going to look like, but it helps to, kind of be like, okay, I can see exactly what's going on. I can hear what the actor did originally, the baseline where they place the energy and the voice and stuff. And, it's sure, I guess you could say it's like less creative freedom, but I also kind of like that it gives me that guideline. I don't just have to make something up out of nowhere. Because for auditions, I find that's really challenging. Like sometimes if they don't even have a picture of the character and they'll just say, like, oh, here's some audition lines and make something up, it's kind of like, well, I need to at least know the baseline of what you want.
Mhm. Yeah, when I did talk to Amber the other weekend, she said that she didn't even audition for Comey. She just was given the part. Was that your experience too?
Yeah, same here. We knew the director of the project, and he'd worked with I know he'd worked with me anyway on quite a few other shows before. He was actually the voice director for To Your Eternity, since you mentioned that before.
Mhm.
And, some games I worked on, this and that. So, he was pretty familiar with my work by this point. We've known each other for years. And I think, he saw like that character and was just like, okay, I know who would play her.
Out of the like competitions that she has with Komi, which one was your favorite?
Um, I remember one that stuck out because it was just so absurd was like, I'm gonna beat her in the eye exam. Cause it's like, who else is gonna think of an eye exam as something competitive? It's like the race, the sports stuff, that's understandable. But she's just like, no, not even like the test. It's like, oh, I'm gonna have better vision. It's so ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah, there's several tons of people in the sub have said that your performance as her is one of the definite highlights that stuck with them.
Oh, I'm so glad. Yeah, it was really fun to play a character who was kind of, big and out there and lots of energy and stuff like that. Cause, I am sort of getting cast as like more like refined characters lately. And that's a really cool archetype to explore too. But, sometimes I just miss being able to be more of a gremlin, I guess.
Well, I know one of your more realistic, grounded, beautiful roles was in Violet Evergarden.
Yeah, that was really fun. I didn't get to have a whole lot in that, but thankfully then we had the movie that I got to work on.
And then, another thing with boy voices outside of Beatrice, I know you got to do boy voices in Re:Zero as well.
Oh yeah, that's right. I played Heitaro. Normally we think of like Beatrice because that's the only character that, people talk to me about that show. But I was like, oh yeah, I did get to play some others. That was pretty cool.
Is there anything else that's upcoming that you can safely talk about that you're part of?
Oh, I'm trying to think. Some point, I know I say this all the time, but at some point, Phantom Breaker Omnia is coming out, I believe, which is another fighting game I worked on. So I'm excited for that. I hope that gets the hype it deserves. Let's see, the My Next Life as a Villainous. They just announced the OVA is getting dubbed, so that's really cool. I had a lot of fun working on the show. Normally I feel like isekai isn't really my thing in terms of like a viewer of anime, but I felt like this show was so well done. Like I actually watched the first season in Japanese, like while I was still working on it, because I was like, oh, this is really like I want to see what happens. So I just thought it was such a cute and well done show, and was really excited to get to return to Sophia again.
Yeah, you had a fun role. I actually watched most of Demon School too.
Yeah, that was really fun. That's one I think maybe there's going to be another season of that eventually. It's like most of the times we only know because someone will tag us and be like, hey, they announced another season in Japan. I hope you guys return. And then, at some point, presumably. So yeah, if that does happen, that'd be cool to get to return to Amari because I have a lot of fun with her.
Mhm. Have you read ahead at all with Demon Slayer to see what happens with that?
Oh, I'm familiar with some of it. Like I haven't read the manga, but I have been spoiled on certain things because,
Okay.
one of the things because I had such little dialogue in the actual series, I was like, but I have a feeling she's a very important character. Like clearly there's more to come with her. And then I was like reading some stuff online and I was like, oh, and then one day she was trending on Twitter. So, I was like, oh, why is she trending? And I looked at that and was like, oh. So at some point, I'm excited for whenever that happens to get to dive further into her character.
Mhm. And I know, well, I guess it is, yeah, it is relatively popular, but I think Sleepy Princess, that's a really cute series too.
Yeah, I had a blast with that one. I'd love it if we got more of that someday.
Do you think you have a preference for working on darker projects or comedic or?
I like both, honestly, because I feel like if I just did one or the other, it would be really easy to get burned out. But I think there's just so much more, because sometimes it's like, okay, I really want to play a character that has like a deep backstory that I can like dive into and all this kind of stuff. And then other times I'm like, I just want to work on like something fun and silly.
Mhm. What do you think is there, if there's been a case where with a role that you were recording that you had to take a break from or multiple breaks from because it was so emotionally draining, if that's happened?
I mean, most time that's not really like something that's up to us, but a lot of times sessions are between 2 and 4 hours long.
Mm.
So, you might be doing, say, like 2 hours of a character that's, pretty intense, and then you'll work on like a comedy show after, like later that day or what have you. So I think it's kind of just like, you get in that headspace when you need to work on that project. And then after that, you can switch to something else if you need to.
And then this is related to people. Has there been a case, or at least maybe early on in your career, where you were really starstruck with who you were working with, or?
Well, the thing is that like most of the time we don't even know who else is on the project with us until it comes out. So like for example, when I was working on Near, like I knew who Kyle McCarley was. Like we'd met each other like at the studio like at a different studio in passing before actually. And we talked about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure for some, I mean, of course it's me. I'm going to talk about JoJo, but like I'd only met him maybe once, I think. And so I think at one point I was like, oh, so who's playing 9S? Because obviously I'm like interacting with this character in all these scenes, and I'm just seeing like his lines on the spreadsheet or whatever. And they're like, oh, it's Kyle McCarley. So then it kind of helps sometimes if I do know who the other actor is, because then I can kind of imagine their voice and like how they would read the line when I respond to it. But then we met up and actually like did like this AMA on the Near subreddit way back in the day, like when the game came out. So I was like messaging him on Facebook like, hey, like this is gonna sound weird, but you're my 9S. Like let's meet up or whatever.
Yeah.
And the other thing, like for JoJo, because everyone's like, well, what was it like having Matt Mercer play your dad? And, I had met him years ago, and I think we talked about JoJo, this is a pattern. And I remember him saying like, oh yeah, I hope you get to play my daughter one day or something. So then when I put together a cast party when Stone Ocean came out, I was like, I didn't even have like his contact info aside from like his Twitter, which he gets like spammed on. But one of the other cast members was able to reach out to him, and he actually showed up to the cast party, and I was so surprised. So it's like, hey, it happened. I made it work. I'm playing your daughter. So that was still, because I mean Matt Mercer was like pretty much a celebrity. So it was, even though I had met him before, it was like I met him when he was mostly just doing voice work. This was before like Critical Role. So it was still like, usually I'm not like, oh, when talking to other voice actors, because it's just like, oh, these are like my peers and my friends and stuff. But it was kind of wild seeing Matt again, not gonna lie.
Mm-hmm. One of the coolest moments of Stone Ocean for me was in episode 3, the like unnamed blonde prisoner that goes crazy at Jolene asking for money. That was really funny to hear. That was Carrie Savage.
Yeah. I thought that was her. It was funny because it's like, she had already her stuff was already in when I recorded that scene. Like a lot of times I was the last to record on JoJo just because I had so much dialogue. So thankfully I'd get to hear, in like the preview sometimes like, oh, a little bit of like what I was responding to or whatever. And I was like, oh man. So it was so funny. It was like, oh, it was right. It was her.
Yeah. And way back when you before you even started, I know you said that you said before that you sent a demo to Yuri Lowenthal.
Yeah, and it was, it's so ridiculous because it's like now that would be so looked down upon, but it was kind of like back then it was, because now it's like there's literally thousands of people trying to get in, and like I get emails like every day from people being like, hey, I want to be a voice actor, like what do I do? And I write articles and things like that to help, but I was like so grateful that he like actually took the time to like respond to take me serious, because most of the time it's kind of like, okay, this like dumb teenager wants to be a voice actor, like whatever, with like their crappy homemade demo. But he was like, hey, if you're ever in California, let me know and I'll see if you can sit in on some of my recording sessions. And that is like such a generous offer. Like that was so cool because there's really no substitute for like getting to actually see an actor work in real time in the booth and seeing what it's like for them to take direction and stuff. And I was able to do that for a few other actors back when I was kind of getting started and stuff, like, oh, like, can this person sit in on my session? And now I feel like can't really do that anymore. One of the big reasons is COVID, obviously, because they have to really limit like nobody who's like, unless you have a specific reason that you have to be in the studio, you can't be there. And also like with NDAs and stuff, they can't really, if a project's not out yet, they can't have people sit in. So, but it was fun like back when we were allowed to do more stuff like that.
Mhm. And do you still find yourself being inspired by other voice actors' performances to like with the characters that you do or auditions that you do?
Sure. I mean, I'm even just inspired by like my friends, like people I know on a regular basis. There's so many times where I'm just like, oh, I have an audition for this type of character. Well, like this actor does really good at this. I'm going to kind of like, take a little inspiration. And like everyone does that. They call it good actors borrow, great actors steal.
Mhm.
Because it's not like you're like copying some, even if you're like, oh, well, I really liked okay, like an example is back in the day, I was in a show called Blood Lad, and I played this character named Hydra Bell.
Yeah.
And I took a lot of inspiration from like Kari Wahlgren's Haruko for that role. And, it wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna like copy Kari like obviously I was like doing my own thing, but I used kind of her work as sort of like an inspiration for what I wanted to do with that character.
Mhm. Yeah, it sort of ties into my final question is always asking, what do you want your legacy to be?
Well, of course, like selfishly, I'd be like, oh, well, I want to be known for playing Jolene Cujo in English or what have you. But, I think the real test of like what makes a good legacy isn't so much, hey, this person did a lot of cool work, but rather like how they influence the people around them. So, as much as like it'd be cool if I'm remembered for playing some iconic characters or what have you, I think what actually means more is when I hear people say that they wanted to be a voice actor and they didn't know what to do, and they found like my the resources that I help run, like the voice acting club, or they read some of my articles or this or that, and when they say like, hey, this helped me like start on the right path, or the resources that you gave, or sometimes like I direct demo reels for people that they aren't ready to go to like one of the big expensive demo producers. They just want something to submit to indie stuff on Twitter. So,
Mhm.
or, if somebody tells me, hey, that demo that you directed for me, that helped me get like a job on this, or that helped me get cast in a role, it helped me get this new client, like that kind of stuff means so much to me to hear, because I feel like we can't, especially in a community that's so big, we can't just look out for ourselves. We have to look out for the other people around us.
Mhm. And is there something that you want people to take away from your performances so far?
I mean, if somebody is inspired and says like, "Oh, I want to do that," that's always cool. I remember like listening to anime dubs, or like playing a game or something when I first decided I wanted to be a voice actor. And that'd be really cool if someone was ever listening to or playing something that I was in and it's like, "Oh, I want to do something like that." I mean, that'd be awesome. But I think kind of like the biggest piece of advice that I usually tell people for how to be a good actor, and it's something that I try to follow myself as well, is that it's never, you never want it to be like I'm performing the line from the script. It's always got to be believable and authentic. Even if you're playing a character who's silly and big and over the top, it still needs to be believable in that universe.
Mhm.
So believable, it doesn't always have to mean like, oh, it needs to sound natural and realistic, but it needs to sound like that character is actually living that truth, like saying those things. It can't just sound like an actor performing the line.
Mhm. Well, thank you. I'm glad that we got to do this.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Yeah, bye.
Take care.